Well, thank you, Nicholas. I'm grateful. So I'm going to be doing a talk tonight that's not actually a pitch. We're not doing anything around selling. We're going to be talking about trends, and I'm going to kind of go up here so I'm closer to the screen. You guys can all see me. Just to set some context, my personal background, I've been involved in technology really since I was 13. I learned to program at a very young age, and originally from the United States, born and raised in New York. I helped start Wired magazine in the early 90s, and this I think will be relevant now because personally I've witnessed a lot in technology in terms of the evolution and the changes, and this talk is basically about, is AI really a sea change? What does it actually imply? And it orbits around this theme of what we call personal intelligence, as distinct from maybe artificial intelligence. So let's begin with framing a little bit, like the Mirage. So we are here today, and we see this extraordinary shockwave that basically hit the world starting in November of 2022 when OpenAI released ChatGPT. Everyone was like, oh my God, AI is finally here, holy cow. And we had all kinds of wacky stuff happening, right? People started mixing pictures with AI. They made the Pope wear a puffer jacket, which was awesome. And they started creating videos using things like Sora, and that was pretty awesome. And then DeepSeek came out earlier this year, and people totally lost their minds, like, oh my God, that is unbelievable. And with that came all this money, like just piles and piles of money. NVIDIA did especially well. It's now, I think, up to $4 trillion. Yeah, make that $3 trillion. And, you know, Mr. Altman has been raising a ton of money as well. And we've got the main players like Microsoft, Amazon, and so on, billions upon billions pouring into this sector, all around this notion of these large language models, these general purpose transformers. With it came a lot of fighting, right? People are fighting, basically to take control of this entire medium, right? You've got people like, interestingly, Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak suddenly claiming, we need to take a break. We need an AI code of ethics. Like, okay, really, guys? And then you've got Sam Altman almost getting fired, coming back, like, oh my goodness. And the EU, passing some of the strongest AI legislation. All this is happening rather fast. But we can ask ourselves, is this time really different? Like, is this hype cycle really different? And so we can look at other points in history. Like, were these bigger? Energy revolutions, right? The invention of steam power, electricity, nuclear power, like that seems pretty big. The whole transformation in transport that happened in the last couple hundred years, right? From trains to planes to cars, it's rather extraordinary. Rocket ships taking us to outer space, that seems pretty big. And of course, these enormous communications revolutions where we saw everything from daily newspapers in the early 19th century to the onset of telephony, radio, broadcast television, the onset of the personal computer, and ultimately, yes, the iPhone in 2007, which has captivated all of us. I mean, these were massive changes too, right? But we're supposed to believe somehow this change is bigger. We see a kind of rhythm in all of this stuff if you look carefully, which I think is important for us to start to understand, that we tend to move in the beginning of a technological innovation cycle from a kind of centralization to decentralization. The disruption is a move from a centralized system to a decentralized system. So here you have a mainframe computer moving to a personal computer. You have a centralized switchboard for telephone calls moving towards this distributed network of cell phones. We've all got one probably right now in our pockets, I do. And of course, broadcast television, right? Once upon a time, Walter Cronkite told the world what was happening, and now apparently you can tell the world what's happening and get 1 million fans on TikTok. So this is a really decentralizing shift. And when we look at this shift, we kind of see that it's moving from a one-to-many kind of model to one that's more of a many-to-many model. And that's kind of understood implicitly. But underneath it all is this kind of thematic, which has been referenced to as the cathedral and the bazaar. And what does that actually mean? There's a way of looking at the construction of things in a very centralized way, the cathedral. And then there's this bottom-up approach called the bazaar. And in 1997, a person named Eric Raymond wrote a very famous essay called The Cathedral and the Bazaar, which was the beginning of the open source software movement, right? The ultimate kind of bazaar. And what we face now with AI is basically a question. Are we going to build a giant cathedral under the control of a few? Or will we have this be more like a bazaar that we all have some ownership in and stake in? I think that is a fundamental question. Because I think we can all agree, if this winds up being a giant cathedral, The level of intimacy that that implies from our most personal knowledge to feed this AI sounds scary as hell. So the stakes here are a little different, right, than whether you have a centralized television station. This is on another level. And that brings us to this fundamental question of who is going to own our intelligence at the end of the day, right? People keep talking about the internet has been totally mined. Something like 3% of the world's knowledge is on the internet, and the other 97% isn't. We've got to get to it. That's scary, right? And I think at the end of the day, this is going to become the fundamental battlefield in AI, right? It cannot continue scaling as it is unless it penetrates into all of us here and starts getting information we have that currently is not available. So we are at this fork in the road, and we can kind of look at it in a couple of vectors, right? Where does it run? Where does AI run? Does it run on these big centralized mainframes, like these cloud compute stacks? Or does it run on our phones, on edge, like under our control? Like, that's an interesting question. Who actually gets values? Does it get value from our data? Does it get value, or do we get value? What does that even imply, right? We're gonna be giving our data. What's our value, other than the service itself? And ultimately, what is the context for this data? We have built a marketplace built on surveillance. That is what has happened in the last 20 years. The attention economy is monetizing our attention, right? And if AI extends into the attention economy as a solution, that is fundamentally at another level of scary. If you thought it was scary enough, some of your social graph and what's being collected, imagine collecting your most intimate thoughts, your most personal passions, and losing control over your very soul. That is what we're talking about here. This is non-trivial. So what is the pattern? Well, there's a playbook to build your cathedral, and we can see this, and the tech industry is very good at these playbooks, right? You kind of start with this promise, anyone can build, come homestead on our terrain. From there, you kind of escalate to this massive, kind of experimental phase. Everyone's blossoming, and the early web kind of looked like that. Anybody can have a website. That is really cool. And I remember very well in '95 just being like, that is so awesome. I can build my own website, and I did. And it's still live today, and I wrote it myself. Haven't changed it. And then at some point, there's a choke point that shows up. Like, there's a sense that you can throttle. In the case of the internet, it was actually search. Search became a very powerful choke point. How do you find stuff on the internet? I made a website, you made a website. How are we going to find websites? I don't know. Google figured it out. It became kind of a choke point. And suddenly, with this open network, started to feel closed, the beginning of the cathedral. And then capital gets really excited. Money gets excited because it de-risks the money. Who wants to fund a totally decentralized thing where maybe it's going to churn and change? No, not really. I'd rather burn down and like get the value in. So Google, needless to say, did rather well when they went and raised some money. Now, if you miss this pattern, you might repeat it. But if you see it early, maybe you can stop it. And I think that's one of the theses here with AI. Can we stop it, right? And we can look at this playbook in the tech context, right? The beginning of the PC revolution was this awesome promise of, yes, computers everywhere. It's so cool. We can all have a computer. And it became ultimately gated through Microsoft Windows, which at its peak had 90% of the PC market. You see it in the web environment, as we said with Google, right? Anyone can publish, Google takes over. In social, by the way, there were things like MySpace, this huge Cambrian explosion of social networks. And in the end, Facebook really locked it in. The insight being, if you were your real self on a social network, that social graph had a really higher value than a fake self. And MySpace, you could kind of be anybody, right? You could be a dog on MySpace, not on Facebook. You had to be you. And ultimately, mobile was another interesting choke point. You built this phone, it was like, oh, wow, you can do an app. But not really. You have to submit it to an app store. We'll gatekeep the whole thing. We're going to choke point this entire platform. AI might be moving at the fastest speed ever, right? We see in November 2022 the democratization, like, oh my God. Like, anybody can do stuff in AI, then all of these wrapper companies show up, which are not really innovating necessarily in AI, but they're kind of building around these LLMs. Cambrian explosion kind of happening right now. And then at some point, you start to discover, wait a minute. For the most performant, you're going to have to pay. We're going to start controlling that. And I predict soon enough, you're going to start having, shall we say, in exchange for your data, free AI services. Because the truth is, the expense on these things is insane. We think $15 to $20 for a million tokens for a frontier model is actually the true cost. Just to be clear, that the internal cost to the company is 15 to 20. They're selling it for $2 or $3 or $1. They're going to have to do something about that, or they're going to go out of business. So we see all this money coming in, right? That's sort of the toll booth. So why does this always happen? Because the promise of the bazaar and the nature of capital kind of leads to this cathedral. It's just the nature of it. You're not going to put a lot of money into something without some surety. And if you look at the top 10 companies by market cap worldwide, and you see them here, I think about 6 or 7 of them are truly tech cathedrals. Microsoft, Apple, NVIDIA, the top 3 there, Alphabet, Amazon. Oh my God, we're still only tech. Finally, Saudi Aramco. Saudi Aramco made it. Not really helpful. Meta Platforms, Taiwan Semiconductor, and then we have Berkshire Hathaway and Eli Lilly. So really, this extraordinary concentration around tech companies at the top of this list. There are some examples of bazaars that endure, and this is kind of interesting. These are the open things that kind of manage to persist. We've got the scientific model, peer review. That's been going on for hundreds of years, like that protocol. No one has been able to capture that. You've got container shipping. I didn't really know much about container shipping, but there's a standard for that, and no one's really sort of been able to take that over. It unlocked all of globalization in a way is powered by this standard. You can put something in a container and it works. And of course the internet standards were huge. Without these standards, TCP/IP, HTTP, simple mail transfer protocol, we'd have no internet. These are truly open, and look at what they created. Unbelievable, right? So in a sense, you could say applications get old and protocols get shared. So let's look at this notion of a bicycle for a minute. The bicycle, in a way, is the ultimate sort of bizarre technology. Anybody can have a bicycle, no one really controls them, and they kind of take you anywhere. In fact, Steve Jobs himself was quite smart about this. He actually compared the personal computer to a bicycle for the mind. He got it. He was like, this is a really distributed, decentralized technology. A part of him really wanted that to be the case. And you see an ad here. This is an actual ad for Apple from 1978 that says a bicycle for the mind. And the principle here, though, is that when you are building something like AI, is it going to be a bicycle for the mind, ultimately, or is it going to be something else? And what we kind of see here right now is if you want to use performant AI, kind of like for free, unless you pay a lot of money, you're going to have to submit a lot of your data, and that's just the way it's going to be. That's the value exchange. In exchange for that, you're going to get this deal. And the question becomes, what if in the AI context, owning your data, right, having sovereignty over your data actually leads to more effective, more performant AI? It's a very interesting question, and very rare that there might be this alignment between something that's actually good for people and makes the technology work better. So when we look at how you avoid this type of capture, meaning moving into the cathedral mode in AI, it gets to really specific things, like as builders, right? Now thinking, many people here are working on AI projects, how does your architecture kind of work to diminish that probability? What's your user experience? And what are the economics like? You have to be very careful, because if you're not careful, you might wind up reinforcing some very dangerous mechanisms. So we do know some best practices here. This movement from centralized cloud compute to local context is extremely important, because that does distribute the AI knowledge onto your device away from central control. That's like a fundamental architectural choice. The more we can build in this direction, the better. And you can kind of see this craziness of where AI chips can go, right? That's one good piece of news. And there's an efficiency scale going on with the models, where the models are getting both smaller and very performant. Those things are converging. The user experience becomes a shift from kind of always the user coming in with all their context, the way they have to do it, to one where it kind of anticipates. Because if there's trust there and the data is being shared because it belongs to you and it's private, the AI can be much more intuitive. So it can suggest rather than ask, right? It becomes much more useful, ultimately, because of that trust existing. And the economics become different. So right now we're headed towards an extractive model in AI. It's very likely that we'll start seeing a dynamic where they're going to monetize your attention very intentionally, using AI, using your data. We need to move away from that to one of fair attribution, where you basically know what you've contributed, right? It's your data, and from there you get the service appropriately, but it's ultimately under your control. I just want to cite for a minute, if we look at these trends, it's really good for Montreal, because actually as a community here, these actually align with a lot of our values, right? Canadian, Quebec, Montreal values. We have amazing privacy rules here in Canada, so by definition, anything we build can potentially be sold as more private than most. We have this amazing research bench. We're here now, right? Mila is here, NextAI, everything is here. We have incredible talent right here. And we've got this ethical lineage. George Hinton, Bengio, they're all here, right? And they've created many, many followers. And finally, we actually have this interesting mandate to increase GDP per capita here in the country. So these are all converging into, I think, a very interesting opportunity for Montreal. And the ultimate unlock here is building an AI is remarkably cheap in many ways. And we don't have a lot of capital here. So that's actually turning into less of a blocker because we can make a lot of progress without needing the kind of capital you might have needed before. So I think the message here is to be the protocol, right? That we should run AI on our devices, not theirs. Build towards that direction. That we should give people a personal vault for their private data. So that's really their data, and they can then maybe give AI services access to it in a very controlled way, but ultimately they have data sovereignty. And create honest systems that pay people fairly for if they do contribute their data. So ultimately, we all have a stake in what we're helping build here in terms of AI. So with that, I thank you for the attention you've given. And Nick and I are working on something a little bit in this direction of what we call personal intelligence, data sovereignty. If you want to get access to it in an early testing environment, we welcome you, and thank you for listening. I'll be here. Thank you. Thank you.